expression that keeps coming up in my head. It's like on the outside looking out.
Okay.
Which is kind of how I feel. Yeah. I'm on the outside of the bubble and I'm looking in the wrong direction. I guess I've always sort of operated outside of the studio environment, the big sort of studio environment, and I'm sort of feel like I'm not really part of that culture, and I'm faced the wrong direction anyways. So I guess it doesn't really matter.
But so that's kind of fascinating. Okay, you came out of Emily Carr in like '92. What did you come into? What was the animation landscape like when you came out of Emily Carr?
Well, it was bleak, but it seemed like the timing was perfect, like right when I got out of college, because Disney came out with that Beauty and the Beast, and that was a huge sort of pivotal point where everybody started to sort of ramp up their feature animation departments. And when they saw the money that was made on the coattails of that movie. And then as far as TV animation goes, I think The Simpsons just sort of started to become popular. So that kind of revitalized that whole TV animation with this sort of possibility of going for an older target group.
Yeah.
And so that kind of revitalized that. So you get the TV and the feature animation industries kind of ramping up right when I graduated from Emily Carr. And then I remember Akira was screened here when I was in college. And I guess there might have been a section of the community that was kind of familiar with Japanese animation, but then it started to become introduced to like to the mainstream.
Yeah.
And through Akira and Ghost in the Shell, then you had sort of this convergence of three different things happening. You know what I mean? And so that was kind of the climate. That was the landscape that I sort of graduated from college in back in '92.
So like that's fascinating because already you're talking about it on, like the landscape you're talking about is the global animation landscape. I came into it in like '94, not long after you, but it was already about just about what's going on in the Canadian, because by that time Teletoon had just started, and I remember like in '92, that's when also like Ren and Stimpy was happening. And the Batman animated series was happening, and Animaniacs.
Well, that was huge too, wasn't it?
So it was. That's when the new kind of approach to animation got kickstarted. And so things were definitely changing. By the time I got into it, there was already a Canadian studio system that was forming that was all service work. And we've been defining ourselves kind of ever since. Like, you come out of school today at a place like Emily Carr or at a place like Cap College or Sheridan. I mean, Sheridan tends to look at the broader spectrum, but kids coming out look at, well, where are the jobs in Canada? And it's sort of like that, it's that standard feeder into TV work. Yeah. And you landed at a time when I think, the impression I get is that it was in those couple of years when that kind of started. But the fact that your touchstones when you're coming out are anime, Simpsons, like you're talking about things on and feature work. You walked into a world that was already defined by, at least like what was being given to you to look at was the global perspective. And you seem to have been, that's that outside looking in, I think, as far as the Canadian system that you're talking about. Did you ever work in a Canadian studio like full time?
No, never. I've never really worked in Vancouver. I worked at Pascal Blais in Montreal. Yeah. On a couple of commercials. So that would have been maybe a total of 6 months, maybe 5 or 6 months over the course of my whole career.
Okay.
And I think I just, I worked, I graduated from college and I worked in Port Coquitlam for about a year or a few months. And I kind of gathered pretty quickly that all the work was coming from California.
Okay.
So I rented a car and I went to San Diego Comic-Con probably back in 1992.
Okay.
And I had my demo reel from college, my graduation film, and I had my comic book portfolio, which was basically just completely influenced by Frank Frazetta. That's kind of what I was into back then.
Really? Okay.
And so that's kind of what I went to California armed with those two things. And I sought out Peter Chung in LA. Somebody had a contact number for him here in Vancouver. And that was basically, like San Diego, nothing really happened there. But on the way back north, I stopped in LA. I met Peter Chung. Peter hooked me up with the people at Colossal Pictures in San Francisco. Yeah. And he gave them a heads up. So I walked in there. They were kind of expecting me. And like Peter must have gave them like a really good like referral.
Yeah.
Because when I walked in with my portfolio and my reel, like the whole studio was kind of waiting for me.
Really?
Yeah. There was not the whole studio, but there was like Tony, Stocky, and Garrett, and the Lee brothers. You know, all these guys that were senior animators, and Charlie, and they were all just kind of checking all my shit out. And I got a job doing. They got me assisting, which I'd never done before. And I basically rolled through town. They gave me a job. I did a really crap job of assisting. And they didn't think that my portfolio and my reel was my own work. They were doubting that I was presenting my own work.
Because you did such a crap job?
It was a crap job. Like I've never been good at cleaning up stuff. And so they were gonna fire me right then and there. And then they asked the guy I was being supervised by, his name's Bosco. And Bosco said, nah. Give him another chance. And so, you know, the first pivotal point was meeting Peter Chung. Yeah. And the second one was when they sort of put it up to Bosco to see if they were going to kick me out of there or not. And so that's where I kind of regrouped.
So you got the second chance.
I did, and you know what happened? I got a Levi's commercial based on the strength of my graduation film. Okay. And it's a 30-second advert for like a pretty high profile client. Yeah. And I just kind of happened into it. You know, that's kind of part of this pattern of incredible luck that I've had in my career. Like my timing's always been really good for one reason or another. So, and then once I got that first commercial job, then I was kind of slotted in as one of the commercial directors there.
So you got to like pitch, you got to like the concept, everything was yours for the commercial?
Not the concept, but they were looking for something really loose and kind of figurative. And that's exactly what my graduation film was. So they put forward my grad film and they put me forward as a junior director and they actually went for it. Nice. So, you know, that's what kind of started things off for me. I kind of went from assistant, or really bad assistant animator, to like a junior director within a couple months.
Just like that. So when you're given a gig like that, like how did that operate for you?
Well, it's funny, like that Bosco, who actually gave me the second opportunity, or my first, you know, he gave me that second chance at Colossal. Yeah. He was the guy that was assisting me on that commercial. Oh, really? So that kind of started this relationship with me working with Bosco and Stuart Lee, and you know, those guys that I met at Colossal Pictures sort of became the people I worked with for the first few years of my career.
Yeah. I remember like Colossal was one of those places that we'd read about in Animation Magazine, and it just felt like one of those amazing, creative, like it was, that's where you wanted to be when you were a young guy working in the business.
I mean, Peter Chung was in there, and Mike Smith, and there's so many directors in there doing so many different things. They have the Liquid TV thing going on, and really cool. Like they were doing all those really cool NBA Charles Barkley commercials, super dynamic. It was pretty cool, man.
Yeah.
But there was always this sort of there was a good, healthy group of people there that were super into comic books as well.
Okay.
So that there was always this kind of interest in sort of crossing over between comic books and animation.
So Colossal being this amazing place, your perspective on comics and animation, you've done both. Strengths, weaknesses, does it one inform the other in any great way?
I don't know, I guess I just sort of thought that going from animation to comic book would have been an easy transition. But as I started to do that, I discovered how difficult it was to lay out a page, that was compelling and clear and graphic. And then you started to look at people like Mike Mignola and Milo Manara and Mobius, the people really at the high watermark of that stuff. And started to realize how difficult it really was. And then, I mean, you could do a bad page, that was easy, but to do a good page was really difficult. So I was kind of taking I was sort of following more the Milo Manara, Mobius kind of direction, especially in terms of page layout. I like the way Milo Manara was more of a standardized kind of 3-tier layout per page.
Like that the classic 9-panel grid kind of thing?
Yeah, which I think is more of a European type of layout. And so you don't really break out of these 3 tiers per page, but you could cut that in different ways vertically. But then it sort of gave it like a regular kind of a regular sort of pacing, which I thought lent itself more to cinema, basically, like as opposed to going for funky page layouts, which I was never really into. And so that's kind of the direction that I felt more comfortable with. And then, in fact, I kind of went one step further, and I just went 3 panels per page, all basically letterbox format.
Yeah.
And so that was going to feed right into this idea where I was just going to use the comic book as the storyboards for the film. So that was kind of the big plan I had all along.
So this is just for the purposes of when we put this up. So this is for Pear Cider and Cigarettes, because you did it first as a graphic novel.
Graphic novel, yeah.
Yeah. How long ago was that?
I think I finished that in 2012, and I started 2011.
Some of the people watching this may not know the film, other than having read about it. Can you give me a quick 30-second? What's the film about?
Techno, somebody I grew up with. That's not his real name, but he was a year older than us, and he was really athletic guy. Very very impressive. As a young feller. I mean, he was diving off these cliffs, and he played hockey, and he was like the fastest runner, and he used to just do backflips off, he was that guy. He was good looking, all the girls liked him. He was totally fun. We used to pick mushrooms here in Vancouver, and he'd take his parents' cars out for joyrides, and he'd have motorbikes hidden in the bushes. He was like that guy, right? And so it just seemed like nothing could touch him. He was gold. He always escaped danger, that kind of thing. And so that ride came to an end when he was 17 and he got into a car accident. And that kind of started this series, this downward spiral. and he had a head injury too, so he was sort of affected physically and he was affected mentally. And one of the side effects of this accident was he became a ferocious alcoholic. And by the time he was 35, he needed a liver transplant, and he couldn't get one in Canada. So he ended up. Another thing is he got a $1 million settlement from ICBC for his from that car accident.
Okay.
So it's this story of like good luck, bad luck, good luck, bad luck, good luck, bad luck. Like it's just the highs and the lows in the story are so high and they're so low. But to make a long story short, he was in China trying to get a liver transplant, and he was in a bad way. And he called me up. He says, "I need some help. Can you help me?" He just says, I just need help. He phoned me up. And so I agreed to go out there. And the story, what I told you is like the first half of the story. The second half is me trying to get him back to Canada. Yeah. One way or the other. Like his dad's instructions were, dead or alive, Techno needs to get back to Canada. And, he doesn't want us there for whatever reason. He was more comfortable with the buddy, because I think he felt like he was kind of on this sort of collision path to, like it wasn't a pretty sight. Yeah. And so, I got roped into the whole thing. So that's kind of what the whole film's about.
And was this something you were working on like full time? Were you able to, like, did you have money socked away so you could spend a year making this, or was it something you had to kind of do around gigs?
Well, I had just finished my Tron Uprising gig, which went on for about a year and a half. And I was putting some money in the bank. I was putting like $1,000 a month away over the course of that year and a half. And so, that was like 30, 40 grand, something like that. And then they kept giving me checks once we finished. Like, it was ridiculous. I've never been in a situation where you're getting, some vacation pay and sick days and all this sort of stuff. And so, the combination of those two things kept me going into that first book. Okay. Which was the first Parasite, Volume 1, which was about 90 pages. And then I did a Kickstarter for the second book. Right. For the printing. Okay. Only for the printing, yeah.
Okay. So, it's a little history on Parasite. I mean, is this the story like you always wanted to tell? Is it one of those kinds of things?
What's funny is the film is kind of doing the circuit through the festival circuit right now. It's going to be in Brazil for Anima Mundi in July, and they've asked me for a transcript to the script that they could translate into Portuguese, and so I had to do that last night. And so I was writing the whole film down, because I haven't really looked at the film too much in the last few months, and I certainly haven't read the script for a while. And I realized when I was doing it, I thought, yeah, this is exactly the kind of film that I want to do. This was exactly the kind of storytelling that I always, that I think would appeal to someone like me. Yeah. I'm sort of making a film for people with a similar sense of humor, a similar background, a similar kind of music kind of taste, and kind of like a certain kind of appeal to dark things with the kind of a sense of humor, but sort of all based on something that's kind of real. Yeah. So there's a little element of documentary in there as well. Yeah. I guess I'm just, I'm not young. I'm almost 50 years old. And I think I got to a point where I just needed to do something I wanted to see like what the film in my head actually looked like. and to see if it was good, or if it was interesting, to anybody else. But I needed to try it out and sort of see what it looked like. You know, it's a film that I had to show to Techno's parents, you know, and that was weird because, you know, I'm sort of exposing things that are very kind of personal and a little bit incriminating, and just, you know, it just kind of, that's what really felt weird. The fact that I was telling so much information about somebody else.
Somebody else, yeah.
That was weird, and that really was hitting home to me when I would have to confront Techno's family like periodically, and because they knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
But you know, I showed the film to my mother, and she knew Techno, and you know, there was this sort of acceptance of what it was from people that I really trusted, and it sort of felt like it was coming from a place of like I was really sincere about it, and I wasn't trying to lay it on too thick. I wasn't trying to make you feel sorry for Techno. I wasn't trying to like lead you in any direction. Like I was very much just trying to lay out the information, and I just want you to sort of, you're the judge. You can figure it out. So you don't hear the sad music in the sad part of the film. Like I didn't want to manipulate people like that.
I've been biting my tongue because that's what I didn't feel manipulated as an audience, because it would be really easy to fall down that road, and you didn't do that. It feels authentic. You make this film and you kind of lay it all out there, and like you're saying, now you got to show it to people. You got to show it to his parent. So they were aware that you were making the film?
Oh yeah, I gave them the books when I finished them.
Did they know you were making the books beforehand?
Well, actually, you know what? His father actually approached me and asked me if I wanted to do a story about Techno.
Okay.
But his story was a lot different than my story. Like his story, there was Jesus in that story, and it was you know, that was his story.
Yeah.
His point of view, I respect that, but that wasn't how I saw things. And so what I wanted to present was kind of his idea, but through my point of view.
Yeah.
And so my point of view was the point of view of a buddy, you know? You get to know all these things about your friend that your parents don't see.
Then you get to share that perspective back with the parents.
Oh, yeah. So I gave them the books. and I just I left, and I didn't hear back from them for weeks. Oh my God, I was so stressed out about that. And then finally I went over for a visit for something, because we were pretty close. Yeah. And so we were sitting in the kitchen table, and the father, he had the two books, and he goes, "Here, you can take these books back. I don't want them." And the mother went, "Oh, what are you talking about? I love these books. I love looking at Techno, and this is great. You know, don't listen to him." and he was just kind of like, whatever. So there was those 2 points of view. I think there was, you know, when you have a child, you kind of compartmentalize your feelings and your memories and your thoughts about that person. But this was sort of presenting a radically different sort of point of view about somebody that you're intimately familiar with. So you kind of got to change your thinking, or you have to sort of put it out of your head, one or the other. So, but I thought that they would have been interested in sort of seeing what was actually taking place in China when they weren't there. Yeah. You know, the struggle and the whole process, you know, which they weren't really privy to any of that sort of any of those details, which I thought was kind of fascinating in a way. So, you know, I did those books, and then I announced to them that I was going to make the film, and that was kind of met with like I got their blessing basically to do the film, but I was afraid. I'm such a coward in some ways, but I was afraid to actually confront them and actually show it to them. But I knew I'd have to at one point.
Yeah.
But I was sort of delaying the inevitable. And then we started to get some Oscar buzz on this thing, and it started to sort of do the rounds on the social networks and in the local papers and stuff. And so I got a call from Techno's sister a few months ago. She never phones me. And she phoned me up and she goes, "Hey." And I went, "Oh, I know why you're calling." She goes, "Yeah." So she didn't even know about the books, you know.
Okay.
So this totally came as a surprise to her. So I said, "Okay, I'm coming over." So I hung up the phone. I drove over. And then the whole family showed up. And so basically that was sort of the big sort of coming out sort of event for this film. And I think in a way, there's something fascinating for them to know that, in spite of the way the story worked out for Techno, that this story will probably exist for as long as the internet's going to be in existence. Yeah. And in a way that, you know, just the fact of going through the process of making a film and distributing it and doing the festivals and stuff, it's sort of, it puts Techno sort of in this, it puts him in this category of being sort of infamous in a way. And I think that they recognize that, the fact that he's kind of been kind of immortalized in this way. And I think for better or worse, that's just kind of the way it is.
And I mean, for just the very fact that you made the film, their relative, their son, their brother, had enough of an impact in the world that somebody did this.
Well, it was an incredible story. I knew it was an incredible story. You know, like you were saying how compelling the story was when you're watching it. I mean, I didn't write this story.
Yeah.
I didn't come up with the events. I didn't invent anything. I just remembered like someone else's timeline, basically. So, but I knew the way the whole thing played out and the way it was. I knew it would be an interesting, you know, a fascinating sort of story.
Apart from it being a fascinating story, this person meant enough to you that you felt you needed to share it, and that's got to be. And that, as a parent, one way or the other, that's got to leave a mark. That like your son, although it may not have gone well, and may not have been the future, you know, it's yeah, his story is a tragic story. But there's a story there, and it's going to live forever now. And you had to. It's a lot of work.
It was a lot. You know, it felt like, you know, the first part of it where I was thumbnailing out the script, and that went on for a couple of months. And I'd listen to music, like the kind of songs that I was thinking would be appropriate later on down the road. And that was really that was my opportunity to really digest the story, to try to figure out, in a way, I don't know if anybody else has really thought this hard about it, but what his motivations were, why he did things that were kind of questionable. You know, I really sort of got inside Techno's head there, obviously. And it's not really until you start thumbnailing out stuff and you start to draw someone's likeness, and you're doing it for day after day for like a month or two, that you're really kind of experiencing, you know, that story at that level. And there were days where I'd sit there and I'd just weep, you know, I'd weep. But that was over in like the first month or so. After that, I kind of went into like production mode.
Yeah, execution, right? You just got to make it.
Yeah, like I wasn't weeping after 5 years. That would be ridiculous, you know. And so it wasn't like I was so completely like, you know, I wasn't like I was like driven emotionally to sort of to get this story across. It wasn't like that, although that's what it looked like on the surface. It was more a question of, this is how long it takes to finish an idea.
Yeah.
This is how long animation takes to do. And there was never a moment in my head where I didn't feel like I wouldn't pull off this production. I knew exactly what I was getting myself into. And so that's how long it took. And that's the speed of production. And so,
that's the sort of inspiration plus perspiration, right? Like you come up with the idea, but then it's the execution of the idea that gets it out there.
Yeah, no, I totally had people coming up to me and they put their arm around, my back, and they go, like, this must have really affected you, and man, are you okay? And all this. It was like empathy,
Yeah.
But I was like, yeah, I'm fine. But this is how long it takes to do a scene, and this is how long it takes to do a sequence, and this is how long it's going to take to do the film. So I'm kind of in it right now, and I won't be out of it till it's done.
You're making this independent film that sounds, so what, you just self-financed? You just made it yourself?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I tried to get financing for that. I tried the film board route, and I tried to get a Canada Council grant for the script writing part of it.
Yeah.
And I was having no luck. And then I kind of felt like if I got started, I'd have more to show, and eventually I'd have a little teaser that I could start to circulate around.
Right.
And then I started to sort of really branch out to someone approached Netflix for me, and the list went on, and I was getting far enough into the film where I kind of felt like I just wanted to do it by myself. So the way I financed it was I was doing some work for Leica in Portland.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like some designs for a feature. And so it wasn't a greenlit project. And it didn't really have a schedule. And they just kind of were content to let me work on my film.
Okay.
And I would just do a week of work a month. And that was enough to pay my bills. And then, at tax time, I'd have to do like a month or 6 weeks in a row just to come up with a big chunk of money to pay the taxes.
Yeah.
And they were cool. Like, they gave me as little or as much work as I needed to keep bumping along for, about 2 or 3 years probably.
Okay. Cool. That's amazing. I mean, there aren't a lot of ways to not do this totally independently, right?
There's nothing that you could compare this project with that was financially viable. There was, it was a weird length. It was 35 minutes,
yeah,
which is it's a little short for a feature, and it's a bit long for a short.
Yeah.
And there was no model in place that would have paved the way for this project. So I don't know why. I just sort of, after I did the books, I could sort of see the project. I could sort of visualize what it looked like, and I thought that that was something that I wanted to see and something that I wanted to share. And I just wanted to see if there was any appetite for something like that, because it sort of fell in between being an animated film and being a documentary at the same time.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure if it would, if both of those target groups would be interested, or if it might marginalize both of them, and then there would be no audience whatsoever. So, I wasn't sure really.
No, for sure. Well, you're in uncharted territory. You, as an animator, you didn't grow up in the Flash age. When you went to school, you were pretty traditional in terms of your animation training.
Yeah.
And
no Flash.
Yeah. So when you started going digital, you worked mostly in Photoshop, did you not?
Yeah, I still do right now. That's what I'm doing right now.
Right. So your process in animation is not typical compared to what a lot of the people who work in the industry do. Maybe can you share a little bit of your artistic process?
Well, because I'm crossing over from graphic novel to animation, that seemed to make the most sense to me to do it like that. So I was like in the case of that Parasite project.
Yeah.
I had the books done. I knew I was going to animate it. I didn't know where, but I was thinking After Effects maybe.
Okay.
And but I was laying out the book like it was going to be prepared for like a normal animation sort of pipeline. So I had the letterbox aspect ratio, so I didn't have to do any reframing with the layouts or anything like that.
Yeah.
And everything was layered, as you would expect, with the backgrounds, the foreground layers, midground, foreground, effects layers on top of it. So in the course of making the book, I sort of moved the pipeline forward into the layout stage and into the color, probably the color design, stage as well.
Right.
So storyboard, layout, and some of the art direction, or all of the art direction, was pretty much done in the book. So, I'd say realistically that was probably about 20% down the production road. And then I got to this point where I needed to try to figure out how to animate the book. And when I kind of had the time and the resources to actually start on the production of it, which was back in 2013,
okay.
I was looking at After Effects, but what I really wanted to do with After Effects was I wanted to go in there and I wanted to draw. I didn't want to just hinge things around and move shit. I wanted to actually get in there and fuck with it. That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
If something didn't look quite right, I wanted to be able to manipulate it specifically or draw it or erase it. And I couldn't really do that.
Not just stretch it around and warp it.
Yeah. So then I discovered that timeline in Photoshop. And then the first thing I did was that little Wonder Woman thing back in 2013, I guess. Yeah. And that was all done in Photoshop. And it was sort of an experimental pipeline with me and my friend Jordan Oliwa.
Oh, yeah.
And do you know Jordan?
No. Well, no, he's somebody. I think we might be Facebook friends.
Oh, okay.
Like he's a name that pops up all the time for me.
He's a bud.
Yeah.
But it was the two of us working on that job, and we used to get in these really heated they were arguments about pipeline, and we would be like on our way into the office, and we just drop our bikes and we just be on the side of the road going like pointing at each other going, "What are you talking about?" And he'd say, "You can't change a pipeline in the middle of a production." I'm like, "Yeah, I can, watch me," and all this kind of stuff. And that was hilarious. But basically, I was just looking for something where I could, manipulate the artwork and put it on a timeline. I didn't want to use Flash because I didn't like that vectorized thing. So it just made sense to me to sort of keep it all in Photoshop because that's where all the stuff was anyways. And I know from experience that some of the filters that I use, like the noise filters and the color profiling that I have, it doesn't translate even to other Adobe programs. Like you bring that noise filter I have into Photoshop into After Effects, and it just reads it as like a transparent layer. Okay. And then so we've gone through this process, and then it's a matter of trying to recreate the effect that I've made and the color effects that I've kind of labored over in Photoshop, and to one degree or another, it's like a recreation, and I didn't really want to get into that. So I was kind of content using that clunky animation program because it was maintaining the look that I wanted, that I had sort of established in the comic books. So, and that was what I wanted to do, was to take all the the look that I was developing in the graphic novel, yeah, and I wanted to apply it to an animation sort of methodology. So I think and in the course of doing that, I kind of came up with some of my own little my own kind of ways of animating.
Yeah.
I've always sort of thought that there's a huge amount of wasted time in traditional animation pipeline, and specifically, this is how it's always gone in my experience. There's been you get the storyboard, and then you do the layouts. You get these nice layouts, and sort of you sort of start to block in the timings with your posing, and then you time that out, and you've got kind of some tight or some loose drawings that you give to the assistant with some charts. The key assistant they'll clean up your keys. They'll usually toss your rough keys out, which I hate. Like, just keep the fucking rough keys in there. I always thought, but that stuff gets drawn over, and right away. That's a duplication of effort, which is totally a waste of time.
Yeah. So
okay, then you have a bunch of clean keys, and that gets handed off to another assistant, and they do the breakdowns and gradually, a small amount of paper, it starts to double and double, and you get like a big sort of wad of paper that gets scanned, and then that comes back to the effects guy, and the effects guy puts on the highlights and shadows, and then that gets scanned, and then all that stuff gets married together in After Effects. And meanwhile, someone else is coloring all that shit in Tunes or something like that. Then all that stuff gets brought into After Effects. And then when you apply the shadows and the highlights, they can either go blurry or not blurry. And that's basically it. And, the look is the look. And I always kind of felt like I wanted to sort of, what I really wanted to do was I wanted to animate fully rendered pieces of artwork. And what I really, really wanted to get was, I wanted to have shadows that had soft and hard edges in the same shadow. And that's what really gives it that kind of, that fully rendered look. And I kind of eliminated all those traditional animation steps in Photoshop. And I just sort of, like, originally I started going through all those steps, and then I started to realize how much of a waste of time that is, because I had no one to pass that shit on to. I was passing it on to me. Yeah. Like further down the pipeline. So I knew what I had in my head. So, because I'm the assistant and the animator, yeah, and I'm the cleanup guy, and I'm doing all the shadows. So I don't need to communicate with myself about this stuff. So that saves a lot more time. But I started to I took basically the artwork from the comic books, and I would flatten it down, and then I'd break that into layers, like arm, forearm, hand, neck, head, all the facial features, the pelvis, the legs, the knees, the feet. This, depending on the scene. Yeah. But it was very much like, you'd have to break that stuff down. You'd have to fill in the empty places once you've cut that stuff out. So when you move the arm, it doesn't leave like a hole right here. So there's a whole lot of preparation and cleanup work involved. But then I realized when you actually go into the animation part of it, it feels more like a performance, like it's stop motion performance. Okay. Because once you get started, you're kind of in that scene. And because you're starting to move these fully rendered pieces of artwork, and you're kind of going from one piece of artwork to another. And you could key stuff out, which I did occasionally, but it was basically starting at frame one and ending up at the last frame of the scene. And that's how you get that nice flow in animation. It wasn't going pose to pose and breaking it down. Yeah. Although I did have some poses in there. But to get that nice flow, I was just going straight ahead. If the scene turned out bad, that's life. But, it was all about starting a scene in the morning, finishing at night, and putting it in the edit and starting the next scene the next day. So that's the way that pipeline went on that production. So you actually work the whole scene through in Photoshop? Photoshop will take you about 90 to 95% there, depending on the scene, sometimes all the way there. But if you have some, some fancy layering and some parallax and that kind of thing, you might want to take, like, I wanted to take it a little step further and bring it into After Effects. And, it was like the thing was cooked.
Yeah. You
just needed to sort of finish it up in After Effects. I didn't want to fuck around in After Effects. There's a little bit too much in there to confuse me. So I went in there with a very specific thing in mind. I could get in and out in an hour, and then I'm done.
Wow. So so you can work at 90% of the way, and then just that finishing pass in After Effects.
Just the finishing pass, yeah. And I tell you, that made it look just so much better.
Yeah.
And I needed somebody like my friend Johnny Still he'd show me a little trick in After Effects, and then I'd use that trick for the next 6 months, and then I'd say, okay, I'm ready for the next thing, and he'd show me something else. And so, I didn't need much, but I needed a little bit of bumping me up to the next level.
Yeah.
So, because there's people that they're masters of After Effects, and I don't claim to be like that at all. I just need to know a few tricks here and there.
You obviously got a really clear idea of what you want your finished product to look like.
I had a plan going into it. Obviously, I had the books to sort of keep me on track, but I took all those panels. I made JPEGs of every panel. There's already letterbox aspect ratio.
Yeah.
And I made an edit, and I fussed around with that edit during the whole 3-year production. And but I knew before I'd start a scene, I would have the panels cut to a music track. And so I'd render out the scene with the music track, so I knew exactly how long the scene was.
Yeah.
And I bring that into Photoshop. And so then I had with the track, I knew exactly where I needed to hit those accents in the music. So I had that information before I started on every scene, basically. So there was no wasted frames.
Right.
There's no trying stuff out and revising. There was basically just getting it right the first time, hopefully. And if it wasn't, then I'd have to revisit it on the second pass, which could be like a year later, basically. So, but I tell you, like having, being the editor and the animator also sort of made a huge impact in that, the two things were informing each other, and I could just quickly go from Premiere to Photoshop, and just I would even do like a rough pass of the animation, bring it back into Premiere, make sure that it's kind of sitting in there nicely, and then if I needed to make some changes with the timing or whatever, I could do that on the fly, bring it back into Photoshop, and then go ahead with the animation. So I don't know if that answered your question, but it was, that was kind of, I wasn't just looking at this stuff in terms of like animating stuff. I was looking at the big picture and where each scene needed to go. Because sometimes you don't need to really animate a lot into a scene.
Yeah.
In the context of where it's sitting in a sequence, you might be over animating something at the wrong point. But there's also something else, is if you had a certain level of animation, and this is what I learned from working with Pete Candelan on Gorillas, is you could have a certain level of animation, and then one scene rises above the rest of them, and then it sits back into the level of the rest of the scenes. But that one scene that's animated better than the rest, it elevates the whole sequence with a minimal amount of work. All of a sudden, you're sort of lulled into this certain level of quality, and then you're not expecting it. That's the thing, is when you're not expecting it, and it gets really like a choice piece of animation, all of a sudden it sort of brings the whole thing up in a way. And so I was really playing with that concept of putting as little amount of work in there as possible and having the maximum amount of effectiveness out of it.
And it's a really effective approach. I think we see a little. I mean, a lot of the Japanese stuff. You know, the anime approach in terms of a lot of parallaxing, sliding elements, those kinds of things. Keep it minimal in those areas, and then you do a money shot.
Yeah, I guess it does come from Japanese animation. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Look back at like old Battle of the Planets, those kinds of shows. You know, like that's the stuff I was raised on, the old Japanese stuff, and they were. I mean, it's so much about your creative strategy, and that's. I mean, like I've done a couple years doing stuff for the web, and it's the same kind of thing. You know, because if the web budgets are so low, you're trying to see where you spend your dollar, right? And it's the. I mean, you're doing a beautiful version of it because you're controlling so much of the aesthetic. But I mean, so where do your storytelling chops come from?
Well, you know, I started storyboarding with Peter Chung on Aeon Flux, and learned a lot from Peter. Not that that's kind of the way that I would tell stories myself. It's a little too cutty, I think.
Yeah.
And Peter's not satisfied with simplicity. Things always need to be complicated with him.
Okay.
And so I guess I started to develop my own kind of storytelling in my graphic novels, you know, where I was starting to sort of establish a stylistic kind of storytelling, I suppose. But it was really a practice sort of ground for me.
I mean, you're clearly not afraid to let it breathe, which is nice.
I don't necessarily like cutting a lot, you know, for no reason. So I'm quite content just staying on a scene for a while.
So you spend X number of months applying to festivals, spending money on festivals, and not getting in anywhere. Like Annecy, not getting in at Annecy. TIFF, not getting in at TIFF, right?
Sundance, South by Southwest, to name a few. The Toronto Film Festival passed on it. The Vancouver Festival passed on it. But we got into the BFI London Film Festival.
Okay, interesting.
And that was probably on the coattails of the co-production with Passion Pictures, because it was a co-production with a London-based studio. Yeah. So that was good. That was in October of last year, September, I think. And so that was the first one that we got into. But the producer on that, on Parasite, or Cara Speller, she made sure that we were going to qualify for the Oscars, you know, and not shoot ourselves in the foot by doing something that would eliminate us. So we had to make sure that our film was under 35 minutes, which we did. Our film was 34 minutes and 59 seconds. And we had to sort of roll out our online distribution with Vimeo in a certain way. Yeah. And otherwise that would have eliminated us from contention. And then the other thing is we needed to screen our film in LA County for 2 weeks to a paying audience, and then have a little write-up in some trade magazine like LA Weekly or Animation Weekly or something like that. Right. So the combination of those two things, like we didn't go for like a big theater, but we just went for one that would qualify us. So to my knowledge, there was no opening. It was a matinee, and probably nobody went to it. But we got a certificate. Once they take your DPI digital file, they put it in a package, and that gets sent to the Oscars. Okay. And that's your that's basically your application package for that sort of festival contention.
So you guys just call up a theater in LA County,
Yeah.
and you get your film booked in there
Yeah.
for 2 weeks.
Yeah. It costs about $3,000 US.
Yeah, I think that's Bill Plimpton
It's a,
had to do that a couple times too.
it's a racket, man. Because
They know, right? They know they're going to get those calls that time of year.
oh yeah, can you imagine all the people that want to get qualified and they're going to pay some money to it's a racket.
But it worked. I mean, you guys were, when I saw the nomination, it was like, it was. I mean, it's a great film, but I didn't expect to see it there.
Yeah, us either. We didn't expect any of that.
That's got to be a crazy second. That's got to be a crazy moment.
Well, that was the beginning of the second wave of the film. You know, it sort of breathed new life into it. So over the course of the various different levels of elimination, we sort of made it to the nomination level. And then that's when people really start paying attention to it. Predictably, there's a wave of interviews, and the interviews create more attention on the film, and it sort of feeds into itself. And so that sort of played out for about 6 weeks. And I think we had some favorable reviews. As the film that has no business being there, it sort of made it to the nomination. And then there was a lot of unfavorable reviews, which were sort of my favorites, those ones, because those people, some of them were just appalled by my movie and how dare I make such an utter piece of garbage.
Really?
The fact that it made it there is just it just had no business being. They thought that my voiceover was garbage and that had no story, and it's not compelling. The main character's like an anti-hero. It's not what you'd expect in traditional animation. Some people thought I had some sort of I was completely consumed with thigh gap, and I mean, one guy even said that he was hoping that I could kill off Techno in the first 5 minutes of the film, that it just dragged on.
You did see that it was a 35-minute film, right?
I know, but they got to sit through this thing, right? So, and definitely the fact that it was sort of packaged up with all the other nominated films, and it sort of did the circuit of some of the theaters in the States. Mm-hmm. And so there was a clear warning to clear all the kids out of the theater right before my film came up.
Yeah.
Which was definitely a little bit of satisfaction, now get your kids out of the movie. And then, some of the people that ended up staying for that, in spite of the disclaimer that came on beforehand, they were still appalled at the fact that I was showing some pubic hair and some nudity, and there's some drug reference in there, and there's some coarse language, but that's the way I remembered things, and when I look back at my youth, that's it's just the way I remember it. Yeah. So I'm not ashamed of that stuff, but fuck, I showed it to my mother, for Christ's sake. So I showed it to my mom, who's almost 80, and I showed it to my kid, who's 6. Both of them were okay with it, so basically everyone else can go fuck themselves. Except for Techno's parents. Those are the other people I care about.
Yeah. There's my soundbite right there in the whole thing. That's my soundbite. So the actual question then is, what's next?
There's been a wave of potential projects that sort of came about. Most of them have kind of dried up and kind of blown away. But there's one in particular that I'm kind of focusing on right now. I'm trying to get it to cross the start line so we could actually start production on it. But it would be the perfect byproduct of working on that film. So, in as much as I'd love to continue working on my own films and developing my own projects and going, continuing on that route, I think right now I need to sort of make some money.
Yeah.
And so still waiting to hear about this job. If it happens, I'd be good for the next 10 months, and maybe I could cash up to the point where I could embark on another, probably a short animated thing. I don't want to do something as long unless it's a feature or something that's more planned out with a proper budget and
Yeah.
you know, like a proper production. Like I'm not going to go indie again on something so long. But in the event that that doesn't happen, I've got some other short films that I could just sort of cherry pick from my graphic novels.
Okay.
That are basically, you know, I know I could get the music licensing fairly affordably, and I've kind of got the stories sorted out in my graphic novels, and I think I could start to sort of churn them out like one every couple of months and sort of circulate them around. They'd be a little lighter in tone, but still sort of they'd have like, you know, a lot of the same elements. There'd be some nudity, some music, all this sort of stuff that I kind of like.
Yeah.
So I'm just not quite there yet with that. So that's kind of looking down the road, and I'm quite content like spending my own money on that stuff, and until somebody actually sort of decides that that they might want to sort of back me up on something like that, but I'm not going to hold out.
You said you got some initial attention. People were you being brought projects?
Yeah, some people they wanted to sort of hook me into their own projects. They thought it would be they wanted to sort of extrapolate whatever, you know, they thought would be useful from Parasite and apply it to their own projects, which I was kind of I was okay with that, as long as it's, you know, along the same lines of the stuff I've been working with, you know, as long as it had a proper budget and a proper, you know, proper production, that'd be kind of cool. But I've had some people reaching out to me, and you know, I think some people are just interested in sort of having lunch or having a drink.
Right.
I guess they're just curious to sort of see, you know, just to sort of meet and just familiarize themselves. Not necessarily, you know, it's not always about developing a project. Sometimes it's just about you know, just about an introduction and just meeting people. Yeah, so there's been quite a bit of that, and you never know where that's going to go. Like if you meet somebody and you get along, the right thing comes up, then they can always just give me a call, and you know, that's something that that's so intangible. It's going to be hard to sort of figure out, you know, how that's going to go. But I like to leave all those doors open.
Yeah. Like it may not be now, but they'll know to call when the thing comes along.
Yeah, for sure. I'm totally up for that. You know, I've met some pretty cool people in the last couple of years, so it's been good.
So what are you working on right now?
I'm still doing that Leica job, actually.
Oh yeah.
That's been like my main my main thing. That's been sort of helping me pay the rent. Nice. So, but you know, until this other job, the big one, sort of, unless that one crosses the start line, I'll probably continue just doing, you know, some design work for the next little while. Yeah. So I think I've kind of regrouped a little bit. I'm sort of ready for the next thing. I'm kind of well, I think Parasite is well in the distance in the rearview mirror. You know, we already did that Metallica video, which kind of erased any remnants of Parasite was completely erased with that Metallica job. Right. And then, you know, the next thing was that Gorilla stuff that kind of wiped everything clear again. So, I thought things would just sort of continue along like that, but I'm sort of experiencing a bit of a low time right now, like an unbusy time, which it's kind of good, actually. I'm kind of just doing some other things, and the weather's getting better in Vancouver, so I'm okay with that.
Yeah. It's like you've got so many touchstones that you've been involved in, and I don't want to take up like another hour of your time, but those things are all huge for the average guy the average person working in an animation studio in Canada working on a kids show. Any of those things would be like the thing for them. Gorillas being monstrous to most of us. How does something like that happen for you? How does Gorillas come about?
Well, I saw Flux in Vancouver back in '92 or something like that. Remember, I mentioned that I kind of went out looking for Peter Chung.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I did. I rang his doorbell. I phoned him first, but then I rang his doorbell, and I kind of like Peter was going to be my friend regardless. It had to be that way, and he didn't really have a lot of choice in the matter.
Okay.
Well, he did.
Well, he'd always call the cops, right?
Exactly. And then the same thing with that gorilla stuff. Like as soon as I saw Clint Eastwood, I went to London, and I rang on the gorilla's door, and Pete Candeland answered the door, and it's the same thing. Like Pete was going to be my friend regardless whether he liked it or not. And so, but it's not just about friendship. It's about like bringing something to the table.
Yeah.
And it's also about working with people that you kind of get along with. So, we were all of the same age and had similar sort of drinking habits. So why not? I can do the work. I'm fucking ready to go. So, that sort of started that sort of that next kind of wave of work. But I worked with Pete for years. For like the better part of 7 years over at Passion.
Yeah.
I was kind of like he was my go-to guy. No, I was his go-to guy. But really, everything changed. It was Gorillas, yeah, but that was Jamie and Pete. And, the rest of us were lower down in that totem pole. But the thing that really changed things was that Beatles rock band job.
Yeah.
Because that was something which had such a vast, because it was Beatles, but it really got out there. I remember like receiving more emails and more press about that than almost anything else I've ever worked on.
Really?
And that's what led to that Disney, that Tron Uprising. That's what led to that Motor City design work. And then on the coattails of that, that's what led into that Wonder Woman stuff. And then everything happened after. Like it's a sequence of events that happens. Started with Gorillaz to a lesser extent, but it really kicked in with that Beatles stuff. So I'm a firm believer that, the moment that you finish a job, that's the sort of the beginning of the next sort of project. So that's why you gotta, if it's a stinker, you never know if it's going to be your last job.
And it's amazing that you've got one of these careers where you build on each one, right? Like it's the one, you finish that last one, you're only as good as it, but I guess you got to strike while the iron's hot.
Here I am. I'm like 50 years old. I'll always take the work that's more interesting than the one that sort of pays better.
Yeah. And
I think that's kind of worked out good for me creatively, but it hasn't worked out that well for me financially. So, that's kind of how things worked. I knew really, really talented people I used to work with in San Francisco, really talented. And they've kind of gone to work at places like Pixar, and then they've just kind of disappeared. Well, and I've always sort of thought how much of a shame that is to take someone's kind of the potential of all their creative work that they could do independently or through someone else, and apply that towards just churning out these digital features.
Yeah.
And it basically takes someone's career and it sort of puts them in the unknown. And but the trade-off is you can buy a house and you can live a comfortable life, and you probably don't need to work that many weekends. And it's not for everybody.
But it's just so easy to disappear. And I mean, we're trying. That's part of what this whole Startoon thing is about. We're trying to find these young guys, like our winner last year, Andy Greeling. He's got that creative vision, and we're trying to put him in a place where these shows can be led by that creator, where they can still have their voice. But that's it. You've got a career that's sort of driven by your brand, let's call it that. And that can be tough at times, because it isn't the long-term gig with the benefits and all that kind of stuff.
I keep saying oh, this is going to be the one, this is going to be the. But the landscape, that doesn't change from job to job. It's basically you're looking out at the same landscape. So
yeah,
I don't know. I don't want to say that like to distract anybody from pursuing something like that.
No.
But that's kind of like the reality of it.
Yeah. Is NFB something maybe now with Parasite's success? Do you have a relationship with the NFB? Is that a place you'd go back now?
Yeah. In fact, I got an email from somebody from there, the guy that I was in touch with. He's going to be in Annecy. I'm going to be there next week, so we'll have a drink or lunch or something, and we'll talk about the potential of something or not. Maybe we'll just end up having a drink, but I certainly, I like having conversations like that. You never know where they're going to go.
Yeah.
I'd like to do an NFB project. That'd be awesome.
The people I know over there seem to have a very progressive approach to the things they want to do.
Yeah.
And you'd think at this point that you guys might converge in that way.
I think, in all fairness, at the beginning of my project, they probably just looked at my presentation and they probably just couldn't see it, So now I've got something specific that I can point to.
Yeah. With
a track record of completing it successfully, and the way that it played out, and sort of now we can talk about something that's predictable and realistic, as opposed to something that's hypothetical and questionable.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we'll see.
All right, man. Well, I guess I'm going to say thank you. This is amazing. I could keep doing this for hours, but I'm going to let you get back to it.
Well, it's nice to talk to you, Mike. It was a good little conversation.
Yeah, see ya.
Bye.